I mean, I'm not inspired to write a 1.2 million word novel over it, but it is quite nice, I have to say. It's not so much Marcel Proust as more Lord Kitchener, so we should get rid of it. Swann's Way by Marcel Proust. This is volume 1 of In Search of Lost Flipping Time, or La Recherche de Temps Flipping Perdu, as the French call it. So this is a buddy read with a friend that I buddy read books with, and this was his idea. He does have sort of sadistic buddy read choices, and this is his latest. So yeah, we're reading all the way through it. So In Search of Lost Flipping Time is a 4,000 page novel, which is quite handily broken up into, I think, six volumes. And this is the first. Yes, Swann's Way. So yeah, so In Search of Lost Time is it's kind of like a fictionalized memoir, from what I understand of it, from Marcel Proust. And this first volume is kind of a little bit unclear about the ages that he's meant to be, but it's kind of pre-adolescence. I would say it's sort of around 8 or 9 years old to about 11, maybe. This is the Moncrief and Kilmartin translation. And yes, so this is modernism, with a capital modernism. And it's basically all about memory, and it's about trying to sort of find moments of memory, and it's about going over the same memory for pages and pages and pages. So we start off with Marcel. The first kind of 50 pages are about this single incident, sort of, where his parents are having a party downstairs, and he is obsessed. He's been sent up to bed, and he is obsessed with trying to get his mother to give him a goodnight kiss. And he knows that if he goes down to ask for one, they're going to get angry, and it's this whole kind of like, I want a goodnight kiss from my mama. And yeah, that goes on for 50 pages. And that's kind of one of the only thing that he remembers until he has a Madeleine episode. He dips a Madeleine in some tea and tastes it, and then it has this kind of reverse Raven-Symoné effect on him. He's like, and suddenly he can remember all these different memories and stuff. He talks about Mr. Swann a lot, who is his neighbour, kind of, who is this very kind of like swarthy guy who everyone sort of fancies a bit. About halfway in the book, something very interesting happens, that we have a novel within the novel. So we have a big chunk of the book which is about Mr. Swann's backstory, and his kind of love affair with this woman called Odette. He becomes more and more obsessed, and it becomes much more gaslighty and not nasty per se, but he just becomes very, he just becomes obsessed. It's about obsessive love, and it's about some kind of needy love and getting jealous and stuff, and Odette kind of being really like, oh, I love you at the start, and then sort of realizing, oh god, you're a weirdo. And it's very intense, and it's pretty relentless. I mean, there's about 100 pages. Towards the end of that big section, it is pretty much the same thing being repeated for 100 pages, and it is fairly relentless. The only sort of redeeming thing that makes it readable is there's some very, very funny characters, and that's kind of the same in the whole book. There's some really funny aunts that Marcel has, and then there's this group of characters that Mr. Swann hangs out with, and they're pretty funny. But that whole section is about Mr. Swann's obsessive love. And then the end is kind of, we have this little coda where we go back to Marcel, and we have this sort of beginnings of maybe the beginnings of this a similar kind of obsessive love that Marcel has for Mr. Swann's daughter, Gilberte. So yeah, so really it's all about this sort of obsessive love, this kind of like, or needy love, like whether it's a little boy wanting a goodnight kiss from his mother and be like, oh please mummy, to Mr. Swann, you know, a kind of 30-something man being like, oh, to Odette, and then yes, the same sort of thing happening with Marcel, with Gilberte. I mean, this translation, it's pretty hard going. It is pretty hard going. Someone said that it's good. It's probably best that you only read it in sort of 10-page bursts, and I thoroughly agree with that. But I'm interested because this is going to be a year-long at least project for us. Buying second-hand books online is always fun because I'm buying the sort of the vintage versions, vintage publishing versions, and then the newer ones, they have these sort of really sort of lovely plant covers, and I've yet to sort of get a copy which is like that. I mean, when this showed up I was like, oh hello, and then when this showed up I was like, oh hello. But yeah, we'll see. So yes, In Search of Lost Time. Okay, next. So we are continuing with our journey through In Search of Lost Flipping Time, or À la recherche de temps flipping perdu, as the French call it. And we are now on volume 2, Within a Biker Grove. No, Within a Budding Grove. Okay, so we start where we left off in the first book with Marcel. And Gilberte forming this kind of charged friendship, and Marcel sort of falling in love with her, and Gilberte not really sort of playing hot and cold, doing a bit of Katy Perry with him. So we're dealing with adolescence, and we're dealing with this theme of female idolizing, idolizing relationships, idolizing women. And as my friend who I'm budding reading this with, he puts it, it's kind of like expectations versus reality. It's the image that you have in your head about how something's going to go, the relationship you're going to have, and what happens in reality. So yeah, he thinks he's in love with Gilberte, and he sort of imagines all this sort of stuff. He also idolizes Gilberte's mother, Madame Swann, and even when they sort of him and Gilberte have a falling out, he still goes over to the house to hang out with Madame Swann because he's sort of not obsessed with her, but he's kind of fascinated and enthralled by her. And yes, that's sort of what happens in the first half. In the second half, we go to Baalbek, which is a seaside town. He goes there with his grandmother to spend the summer, and there he sees a gang of young girls, of young women the same age as him, and he starts to become enthralled by them, and tries to find ways in which he can join their group. And basically the leader of this group is Albertine, and Marcel's got the hots for her. He's got the hots for her, although he kind of does this thing where he kind of goes between the girls. He's like, oh, maybe I fancy her. No, I think I fancy her. Oh, no, but she's doing that. Oh, I fancy her. And so, yes, and we're dealing with adolescence, and we're dealing with these feelings below the belt and stuff. There's a very funny, there's the most literary description of having a semi that I've ever read in this book, which you can look forward to. So I have to say that I really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed it more than Swann's Way because I think I'd finally got into a rhythm of reading this book. It is very, very dense. It is difficult. I'm not gonna lie. It is difficult. But I found a way of reading it and a time to read it, which sort of suited me and which allowed me to sort of enjoy it more. So I sort of basically I read 10 pages at a time, and I read them at night. So before I go to bed, and I'll read 10 pages and then have a bit of a break, and then if I want another 10 pages. And that seems to suit me well, because it is difficult. And this translation, this is the Moncrief translation with Kilmartin extras. And so my friend who I'm buddy reading this with, he's reading it in the original French, because of course he is. And I told him that I was reading the Moncrief version, and he said something really fascinating to me. He said, I tried that, but it was like he writes the characters as if they're Edwardian English people. And suddenly the penny dropped, and I was like, yes, that is exactly what it feels like. There is kind of a alooshness to these characters, which, if you think of them as English, doesn't really make sense. But of course, these aren't English people, they're French people, they're Parisians. But with this translation, because he has this habit of making it seem like it's Edwardian English people, it just sometimes it sort of throws you off a little bit. And I've read sort of some reviews of the translation, and people say that it is very flowery and just very, very dense, and it is. It's very, very flowery. What was the word someone used on BookTube? Decadent. They called it decadent, and that's certainly, that's a good way to describe it. But although I've had those sort of not issues, but although I've sort of noticed that, I am going to stick with this translation because I do find it interesting, and I am enjoying it now that I have a rhythm. And of course, next we have the Guermantes Way. This is a bit longer, and apparently this is a little bit more difficult. This is like the most difficult one in the series, so I'm a bit nervous. But yes, we shall see what happens. So yes, no, I am enjoying my journey with Proust. And this was I did enjoy this. Marcel as a character, he's a bit despicable. He's a bit he is a bit despicable and not particularly likable, but yeah. Also, there is a character called Charlus who we met in Swann's Way, and he is this kind of he's obviously homosexual, and he's kind of like oh la da da, and we re-meet him in this, and he's slightly older. Yeah, just this really kind of embittered and sarcastic, and yeah, kind of you have to sort of walk around on eggshells, so you don't know what he's going to be like from second to second, and it's really quite sad because he's quite a character in the first book, and then in this one he's kind of grown up, and he's much more kind of, he's very, very cynical towards youth and stuff, but obviously he's jealous, and it's just, he's just a fabulous character and written like really, really well. And that's kind of the thing about Proust, is that he does pin characters down and their psychology in a very astute and adroit way. So here we go. Marcel Proust, in search of lost flipping time, or à la recherche de temps flipping perdus, the French call it. So I'm going to use this opportunity to just talk about Proust and have a bit of a Proust update. Okay, so thus far I am pretty much halfway through In Search of Lost Flipping Time. I mean, we started at the end of January, and yeah, we're kind of taking our time with it, but it is going to take us all year. And I am really enjoying it. It is a big old challenge, I'm not going to lie. There are moments where I'm just like, what? There are boring bits. Oh gosh, they're boring bits. But it's just fascinating. I'm really loving the kind of the process of reading through it. And I mean, the Moncrief translation, or the Moncrief version, as I've heard it mentioned, is it's very, very dense. It's very flowery. I mean, there's a bloke called Kilmartin who came in sort of after the fact and kind of tried to deflowerize, de-purple prose it to a certain extent, but it's still quite, dense. But I am really enjoying the process. I've got a rhythm of reading it now, and yeah, I really like it. The main thing that I really enjoy is that Proust is very good at some character studies, and there are just certain characters. I mean, we'll get to some in a minute later, but yeah, there are just certain characters which I really love, and it's a bit of the thing I most love about reading through this is that it is a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, and that there are sort of Easter eggs. You never know sort of who is going to become, like a tiny minor character in one book will become like a major character in another one, and major characters in one book will just have tiny little paragraphs in in another. So it's just really fascinating. I really love it. This is the scale of what we're doing, and I'm missing one. So this is how big it is. But yeah, no, I'm really, really enjoying it. And we shall see how we get on by the end of it. Okay, it is time for an update, a Proust update. I finished Volume 3 of In Search of Lost Flipping Time, or À la recherche de temps flipping perdu, by Marcel Proust, the Guermantes Way. Oh, right, so there's several things I want to talk about, and I hope that I remember them all, because otherwise I'll be very upset with myself. So my friend who I'm buddy reading this, he had been told, or he had sort of heard, that this was the most difficult of the 6. And so I think we both sort of went in kind of prepared for that. I would say no, this is not the most difficult so far. It's certainly very different than the previous 2. So Marcel is now a young man. He's roughly kind of 19, 20, maybe 21. And this novel is him being introduced properly into society, into upper class society. Now, the book begins with him not learning anything from the previous 2 books. He develops this another infatuation with Madame de Guermantes. Marcel becomes obsessed with wanting to meet Madame de Guermantes, and he's just being Marcel about it. He's just not getting it.
I was genuinely in love with Madame de Guermantes.
No, Marcel, no. This is book 3. We've been through this so many times. You are not in love with Madame de Guermantes. Just get a grip. Thankfully, this novel sees him learning kind of from his mistakes. He does sort of recognise that his expectation of things does not, for the most part, does not match up with the reality, Marcel. But yeah, so the novel kind of pivots around these 2 very extended party scenes. So the first one, in the first half in particular, this party scene lasts about 120 pages and is very dialogue heavy, which is unusual for these books up to this point. And what's interesting about this party scene is that not only is it very dialogue heavy, but we have lots of kind of disparate characters from the first 2 books sort of convalescing together. At the end of each of these parties, Baron de Charlus turns up. Both in the first half and in the second party that happens. And in the first half, I mean, Baron de Charlus, he's a piece of work, is Baron de Charlus. So he kind of offers his assistance to Marcel. If you do exactly what I tell you to, then, we'll make a man of you yet. And Marcel is like, thank you. Yeah, kind of no thank you. I love Baron de Charlus as a character so much. He is absolutely fabulous. He is so ridiculous and so pathetic, but just so... Yeah, he's so funny. Whenever Baron de Charlus turns up in these novels, I'm just like... Also with this book, we have our first death, which happens, or our first sort of bereavement. And I was interested to see how Proust would handle death. Also, the ending of this book is fabulous. We have a fabulous cliffhanger where Madame de Guermantes is... has this sort of amazing kind of choice to make, this sort of ethical, empathetic choice. Is she going to be empathetic, or is she going to say, well, no, I have to go to a party? So was it the most difficult so far? No, I would say not. It is definitely a slog at certain points. I mean, there's definitely, in the second half, there's a 50-page section where I was just like, oh, come on, hurry up! But no, I didn't find it difficult. I think I found it interesting because it's so different to the other 2 in terms of it being dialogue heavy and all the rest of it. And I've said this before, but I really love when there's a couple of moments in here where minor characters in previous 2 have become major characters in this, and major characters. I mean, Madame Swann, for example, she has like a paragraph in this. She sort of becomes this sort of like, hello, I'm still here. So I love that. I love the kind of jigsawiness of it all. I have started the next book, Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm about 70 pages into this one. I have managed to track down all of these. I've got them here. These editions, which I much prefer. So I've got them all here. Where's the Guermantes Way? Yes, this is the Guermantes Way one. No, I'm really, really fascinated by it, and we seem to have gotten into a sort of rhythm. So I think this is probably going to take us a couple of months, maybe a month and a half. But I am loving this one. This has got one of the best openings ever. But yes, there we go. The Guermantes Way. Whilst I'm here, I really want to finish Marcel Proust. Yeah, finishing a Proust novel in Paris seems pretentious and apt. And I was really close to getting a French language version of Swann in Love, which is just the Swann in Love chapter from Swann's Way. I was really close to getting that in French, but I thought, do I really need that? And then, yes, I need to finish. Speaking of Marcel, I need to finish this. I'm only got 20 pages left. Okay, next up we have a Proust update. I have finished another volume of Proust in Search of Lost Flipping Time. À la recherche de temps flipping perdu by Marcel Proust. I read volume 4, Sodom and Gomorrah. Oh, right. So I did a very pretentious thing. I took this to Paris and I finished this in Paris, which was fabulous. So this book is kind of a different... It's the same sort of thing, but it is a different vibe than the others. At the end of book 3, the Guermantes Way, there's something that happens sort of very near the end, not at the very end, but near the end. Marcel, he says, before I went to this other place, which is the end of the book, I witnessed something, and I'm not going to tell you what it is now, but I'll tell you about it later. But yeah, I saw something, and so yeah, just stick a pin in that, and yeah. At the beginning of this book, Marcel, he says, oh yeah, you remember that thing that I said that I saw something? Well, here it is. And what is it? Well, this thing that he saw was actually an act of gay cruising.
Gays?
And they go off and do stuff in a room, and he kind of puts his ear to the wall and overhears the entire thing. And it's like, oh... Okay, Marcel. And so, yeah, so that happens. And then what happens is that we get this kind of 30-page essay on homosexuality. And this little essay is fascinating. It's fascinating on many levels because it's fascinating on attitudes at the time on homosexuality, but it's also fascinating on attitudes at the time, conflating sexuality with gender. There's some really sort of interesting things where he sort of conflates the two. There's also another level of interest with this, because we know now that Proust was a closeted homosexual himself. And so he's writing this protagonist, Marcel, who is kind of super straight, young man. And this protagonist, he has these kind of judgments about homosexuals, and he calls them inverts. And there's all these sort of things that he sort of talks about. But we know that Proust himself was a closeted homosexual, obviously masking the fact in a wider society that he was gay himself. And so it's just all these different layers. The most interesting part of this volume is the second half, where he goes to Balbec. And there's two relationships here that are kind of very, very interesting. So firstly, we have Baron de Chalut, who is really the main, apart from Marcel, he's the main character of this book, Baron de Chalut. We know Baron de Chalut is gay, but it's interesting how he tries to he tries to hide it, obviously, but it's interesting kind of in his sort of close circle. Everyone kind of knows, but doesn't really say anything about it. And also, the Baron de Chalut, he enters this really, really toxic relationship with this young man called Morel. Charles Morel. And Morel is a character who, as happens a lot in this book, in this novel, he's a very minor character in book 3, I think. And in this one, he turns up again as Baron de Chalut's lover. So that's that. Then you have Marcel and Albertine. So Marcel, he's not very likable in this book at all. He does stuff which is increasingly unflattering to himself, particularly how he treats Albertine, who is... They kind of have this sort of fling relationship. It's nothing too serious, but he expects her to sort of come to his hotel room in the middle of the night, and if she doesn't, then he gets really jealous. He's really jealous of her, even though he says that he's not in love with her, but he expects her to be at his beck and call, and if she has other friends and stuff, then he gets really jealous. And he gets even more jealous when Professor Cotard, he mentions to Marcel that Albertine has a reputation for being a little bit of a lesbian.
Lebanese! She said, well, it's got the same letters.
And Marcel's like, what? No, that's not right. And then he sees her dancing with this other girl, and he's like, no. So suddenly he starts to get really paranoid about Albertine being a lesbian, to the point where he is really wanting to take control over Albertine. He's not in love with her, but he can't deal with the fact that she's seeing anybody else, let alone seeing and having relations with other women. And he's like, ugh! And so this kind of sends him on a sort of downward spiral where he sort of is starting to become more and more controlling, and it's kind of giving us hints as to what's going to happen in Volume 5. Now, the end of this book, I'm not going to tell you what the specifics are, but the end of this book is fabulous and very, very stressful and very like, what? Marcel! Oh, Albertine, you in danger, girl. Albertine. So Marcel, he's not... Whilst he is the protagonist, he is now turning into a villain of sorts. Is that right? Well, he's just turning into a protagonist who is making major mistakes. So many things about this volume that are interesting. I mean, a lot of the characters are either suspected to be bisexual or are bisexual. It's just really, really fascinating looking at attitudes towards the time. On a kind of meta level, it's interesting how Proust himself writes these characters and writes about homosexuality. As ever, there are long stretches of boring bits, but this is just like completely on another level to the other three in terms of what happens in it. I mean, that opening scene is wild. Yes, it's all kind of ramping up and the stakes are getting very, very high. So, yes, we shall see what happens to Marcel and Albertine and Baron de Chalut in À la recherche d'un temps flipping perdu.
Blimey.
Okay, so now we have what you've all been waiting for. We have a Proust update. Yes, I read Volume 5, The Captive. So this... Oh, gosh, right. So at the end of Volume 4, Sodom and Gomorrah, things took a pretty kind of unhinged turn with our pal Marcel. And in this one... Oh my goodness gracious, this is a psychological ride, this one. But basically, Marcel, oh God, Marcel, he's a toxic soft boy. So Marcel has he's proposed to this young woman, and And he doesn't really love her, but he can't stand the fact that if she is not with him, then she is going to be off having relationships and sleeping with other people. And he can't handle that. He can't handle the fact that she doesn't want to be with him. You know? And in particular, he can't handle the fact that she will be going off and sleeping with other women. He is just like, you want to sleep with other women instead of me? So to try and stop that, he proposes to her, and he says, like, and he basically tries to do everything in his power to kind of keep her captive, and he keeps her basically under lock and key in his flat. And he doesn't allow her to go outside unless it's under supervision with someone who he trusts. Oh dear. And he tests her. He tests her loyalty, and he tests her kind of honesty as well. So he knows that she's lying about certain stuff, and he kind of tests her with that. And he basically and he gets more and more kind of like overwrought and kind of like ah. And yes, so the psychology of this book is so confusing. I mean, I'm buddy reading this with someone, and I was just like, I don't know. I can't understand what Marcel's doing. You know, and it's one of these things where, you know, you get sort of fixated over someone, and you work towards kind of seducing someone, but as soon as they show a bit of interest in you, then you kind of then you yourself lose interest, and it's like, no. But then he gets jealous, and so he sort of tries to sort of control her again. So it's a psychological nightmare. So yeah, the wheels on the plot bus do not go round and round with this novel. But as I say, I mean, it is just a ride. We do have another extended party scene where we see the beginnings of the downfall of Baron de Chalus. Poor Baron de Chalus, sort of. But yeah, essentially, because we know what the title of the next book is, we kind of know what is going to happen with this one. But it's just sort of this is basically like a kind of a long extended chapter linking. It's a linking volume, I would say, where we kind of we know where we're getting to, but it's sort of getting there. Oh my goodness gracious! But I will say that now, I mean, it's taken us sort of 5 volumes and however many thousand pages, but now it does feel like all of the disparate kind of plot strands from the previous 4 volumes, everything's kind of like slowly coalescing into what the novel is actually about, what In Search of Lost Flipping Time is actually about, which is about sexual jealousy and obsession. And it's kind of been there all the way through, but now it's kind of coming up to into a climax involving kind of all these different characters. So that's cool. We are almost, I would say, on the home stretch. I mean, combined, we have about 800 pages to go. The next volume is 350. The last volume I checked is 450. So we have roughly about 800 pages to go. But this one, it's just a lot. This volume 5 was a lot, and I got so confused with Marcel. I got so infuriated with him. But I think my friend who I'm buddy reading with, he did sort of explain it to me, which I was like, okay, that sort of makes sense. He's just a bit of a toxic soft boy. So yeah, we shall see what happens with Marcel and Albertine and Baron de Chalus. Yes, see what happens. Proust update. We're nearly there, you lot. We're nearly there. I finished The Fugitive, which is volume 6, I think. Yes, volume 6. So now, from now on, I can't really say anything about the plot now, because we're near the end of the whole thing. We're in kind of spoiler territory to the extreme, so I can't say anything about the plot. I can only sort of tell you the experience of reading it. And oh my goodness gracious me. So I've heard some people say that volume 3, the Guermantes Way, is the most difficult, or the biggest slog. For me, this one, The Fugitive, was the biggest slog. So at the beginning of this volume, you do have quite a major plot twist. And for the next kind of 150-ish kind of pages, Marcel kind of goes over and over and over this event and the things leading up to this event, and I did find it difficult to get through. The person who I'm buddy reading this with, my friend who I'm buddy reading it with, he also said that this was relentless. However, he found it, because it's so sort of psychologically accurate in terms of all this stuff, he did find it more compelling a read than I did. However, towards the end, we have 3 or 4 sort of plot twists in very, very quick succession, and it's sort of like, oh. It's like the sort of the novel kind of wakes up, and it's like, let's do this. So that's a bit kind of like, oh. So yeah, things do liven up at the end, and yes, more characters turn out to be bisexual, and it's all very kind of interesting. So this is a bit of a slog. I am reliably informed that the last volume, Time Regained, is where is it? Time Regained is more exciting than this one. But yes, so yeah, this was kind of, The Fugitive was a slog. It just was for me. But towards the end, it does get more kind of like, what? So yes, Time Regained is 450 pages, so I'm really hoping to get it done this month. And yes, then we would have finished À la recherche de Tom Flipping Perdu.
It's done.
It's done. It is done. I have read In Search of Lost Flipping Time. Yes, so I recently finished Time Regained, which is the last one. And yes, I suppose we better talk about it. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about... Well, I'm not going to talk anything about the plot, really, of this book, because obviously this is the end. I will just talk about... Similar to the last one, I'll talk about the experience of reading it. So... I don't know what I was expecting with the last book. Someone had told me that the last book, everything kind of payoffs, and it's all very kind of like, ooh. So I was sort of excited for that. And yes, things pay off. Things do pay off. Not in the way that I thought they were going to. I don't know why I was thinking that there would be like one sort of final plot twist or one kind of final big like moment of where everything kind of plot-wise comes together. It's more kind of, whilst a lot of the characters' storylines do kind of not entirely round off, but things are kind of like, you do find out what's happened to a lot of the characters. I wouldn't say there's a plot payoff, but more a sort of thematic payoff, if that makes sense. I mean, this book is kind of, it does feel different from the other ones. I mean, the main reason is because of World War One. We're in World War One with this one, and the characters are a lot older. So Marcel is suddenly very conscious of getting older and of everyone appearing older. There's like a really long extended thing about how people age and, you know, how all the characters look a certain way and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, and a lot of the characters, we sort of find out what's happened to them. I mean, Baron de Charlus, Baron de Charlus is an icon. There is a really kind of ridiculous, not ridiculous, but there's a kind of very unexpected scene with him, which I was just like, I felt similarly to how I felt at the beginning of Sodom and Gomorrah. I was like, oh, we're here. Like, I wasn't expecting it at all. It's kind of, I mean, he is a tragic figure, but there is something iconic about Baron de Charlus. And it's interesting kind of over the course of the whole thing, how the characters change and how they all become kind of grotesque. They all become more and more grotesque as the novel goes on. Because really, this whole thing has been about, obviously there's the obvious things where it's about, you know, obsessive love and sexual jealousy and memory and all that. But what is the point? Well, the point is this character who is trying to find purpose in his life, and you know, in all these sort of things, you know, he makes it into the upper echelons of society. That doesn't really give him much, you know, satisfaction. He tries things with love, but that certainly doesn't give him any satisfaction. What does give him satisfaction? Well, art. So he realizes his purpose is to I don't know how much to kind of say, but basically, yeah, it's basically about the importance of art and literature. So to try and make sense of his kind of failure of a life, he's going to write about it, and he's going to try and turn it into art, which is kind of what the whole thing has been about. But there is a sort of thematic rounding up, and the whole thing does kind of make sense. And it's just really fascinating how, if we take this in the context of modernism and what was happening around at this time with psychology and science and all that kind of stuff, and in literature, kind of wanting to go into the psychology of characters, it is interesting. I mean, for acting, for example, we have Stanislavski, and he was interested in kind of emotional memory and kind of emotional recall and sort of tapping into memories to sort of serve a purpose. And this is kind of similar. It feels similar, kind of this thing about certain sensory things triggering off a memory that kind of suddenly launches you back in time. Because, for instance, I mean, there's a box of kind of like bricks, toy bricks that we used to have that we used to keep at my grandmother's, and they were kept in a box in a room, like right in the kind of, it was like an attic room. It was like this little bedroom, and that attic room had a very specific smell. And years later, we kind of found this box and we opened it, and the smell of these blocks like just completely launched us back to that room that we hadn't been in for like years and years and years. And that kind of, and so it sort of reminded me a bit of that. It was sort of reminded me of like, these sort of moments where we go back in time based on a smell or based on hearing something or seeing something, tasting something, and you know, we've been alive all the way through. We've had a lifetime of experience in those moments, but it's just like a little moment of time travel, essentially. So yes, and it is about kind of he realizes that he's wasted time. Now time doth waste him, and how is he going to get it back? And does he have enough time to do this thing that he? Does he have time to do this thing that he wants to do in terms of writing his life in a fiction? So that was kind of interesting. So yeah, time, memory, love, obsession, jealousy, and bisexuality. There we go. So now is the time to get to the heart of it. Was it worth it? Yes, it was. It was worth it. Definitely worth it. So yeah, the biggest joy out of the book is just how really masterful it is crafted. I mean, the story of how it was written and published is interesting, because the first book was self-published in 1913. And then by the time the second, I mean, they had to kind of get through the First World War, but by the time the second book came out, the second book was the one that won the big prize, I think. And then after that, it was kind of like, everyone was hooked. But of course, he didn't live to see the last 3 volumes published. So those last 3 volumes are not finalised in the way that the first 4 are, which kind of begs the question: well, what would it have been like had he finalised it? It may have been a lot longer. We can sort of assume that, even longer than what it is now. But it's just, it's amazing to me that he had crafted the whole thing. He wasn't kind of writing as he go along. He wasn't by the seat of his pants writer. He really had thought it all through. In terms of the whole Albertine scenario, I mean, that is kind of just like, ugh. I'd be very, very interested if there was any kind of, similar to how Wide Sargasso Sea kind of looks at Bertha from Jane Eyre. I would love to know if there is a novel or something that looks at things from Albertine's perspective, because I think that would be certainly interesting. Yeah, and just the thing about time is you can't defeat it. You can only kind of use it, I guess. Ooh. So what about tips? If you were wanting to read this whole thing yourself, what tips would I give? Well, I mean, first of all, translation. This is the C.K. Moncrief and Terence Kilmartin and the other guy. Yeah, this is because C.K. Moncrief, Penguin Classics. They do the original Moncrief translation. But the thing with that is that Moncrief took a lot of liberties with the translation, but people have sort of called it the Moncrief version, because he changes the title. I mean, it's in his thing, it's Remembrance of Things Past, not In Search of Lost Time. He changes the title of the volumes a lot. And he also kind of changes a little bit of the structure as well. So, because I've been buddy reading this, he's reading the original French, and we kind of realised that volumes were not starting and stopping in the same places, which was kind of interesting. Also, it is very, very flowery, is what I've heard. Yeah, so C.K. Moncrief did that, and then Kilmartin came in and did sort of tried to deflower it and kind of updated it a little bit. So yes, I would recommend this. There is also another major sort of translation in the UK, in the US, and that is in the UK it's published by Penguin Modern Classics, and that is done by several different translators, which I don't know how I feel about that. But you know, there's some people who have talked about it on YouTube, and you know, they seem to enjoy it. So there's those kind of three options that you have in English. In terms of the pace, I mean, for me, a year was fine. Around about 10 pages a day, which sort of roughly equates to 2 months per volume, which was fine for me. Some people do it in 6 months. Yes, doing a volume a month. For me, that would, just because of the amount of other stuff I read, that would have been a bit too much, I think. You know, but that's certainly doable. Some people like to take it even slower and do a volume a year. So that's another option. The only thing about that is I'm not sure whether do I want to be in the company of Marcel for 6 or 7 years? Don't think so. But yeah, I think a year was fine for me. And it does feel like an achievement, and it was certainly doable. And yeah. The other thing is, tip. I don't take notes when I read books, really. I don't annotate and I don't take notes, really. The thing that I think would have been helpful for me would be taking a note of the characters as they come, because you never know who is going to show up later as a major character or a major kind of influence. And towards the end, I mean, particularly in this last volume, there's the big party where, you know, a lot of the characters show up again, and a lot of the minor characters show up again. And I was like, oh, which one is this one again? Which one is Madame Cumbra? So yeah, maybe taking a note of the characters might be worth it. Also, you don't have to read the whole thing if you don't want to. I mean, a lot of people do just start with Swann's Way and then leave it there. The other option is Swann in Love. So this is the French version. My sister gave me this because she saw that I was umming and ahhing about it when I was in Paris, and she actually gave it to me. So this is the Swann in Love chapter. This is in French. But Oxford World Classics, they do publish the Swann in Love chapter from the first book. And that's always an option as well if you're not really sure if you want to read it, and if you don't really want to read a 400-page novel, you could read the Swann in Love chapter, which is like 150 pages or 200 pages maybe. So that's always an option. But yeah, so it's been a big old ride. I've found this whole thing fascinating, and it does feel like an achievement to have read it all. And yeah. There we go. So final thoughts. You can't defeat time, so you may as well use it. as best you can. Try not to become obsessed with the people that you're in love and lust with, because that never works out. Read, watch, look at art, do all that sort of stuff, because art is very important. And yes. Anything else you have to say, Proust? So yes, thank you for watching if you've been watching. If you choose to read In Search of Lost Sleeping Time, I wish you well. It is highly worth it. It is a ride. It is certainly a ride, but it's a ride that I am very, very happy to have done. So yes, thank you very much. Goodbye. Au revoir.